I don't remember exactly when the knocking started. It feels like it's always been there, faint at first, like the sound of pipes shifting in the walls, something easy to ignore. But over time, it became deliberate. It started waiting for me. When I moved into that old house, I thought silence was what I wanted. It sat at the edge of a small town, surrounded by dying trees and tall grass that hissed when the wind moved through it. The floors were uneven, the air smelled faintly of damp plaster and rusted nails, and the walls had that strange, hollow echo that only truly old houses have. The kind of echo that makes you feel like you're never alone in a room. The first time I heard the knocking, I was unpacking in the bedroom upstairs. The sound came from the wall behind me, soft, like fingertips brushing against wood. 3 taps. Then silence. I remember stopping mid-motion, the cardboard box half open on the floor, my breath caught in my throat. I waited for it to repeat, but it didn't. I told myself it was the pipes, or maybe a branch tapping against the siding. Old houses make noise. I forced myself to believe that, but later that night, as I was lying in bed, I heard it again. 3 slow knocks. A pause. Then 2 more. It wasn't rhythmic, not mechanical. It was too intentional. The kind of sound that happens because something chooses to make it. The room was dimly lit by the street lamp outside, its pale light spilling through the thin curtains, painting long shadows across the walls. My breath felt thick in my throat. The air was heavy, damp, like something unseen was pressing against it. I turned my head toward the sound, every muscle in my body tight, waiting. Another knock. Closer this time. It was coming from the closet. I stared at that dark, narrow line where the door didn't quite meet the frame. The light from outside didn't reach that part of the room. It stayed black, the kind of black that swallows your eyes if you look too long. The knocking came again from inside. 3 times. Then nothing. The silence that followed felt like it was listening. For the next few days, the knocking became part of the house's rhythm. Sometimes it came from the walls when I passed through the hallway, sometimes from the ceiling above me, sometimes from behind the refrigerator. It never lasted long, just long enough to make me freeze and listen. And always, it stopped the moment I tried to find where it came from. I started noticing smaller things too. Objects slightly moved when I left a room. A book angled differently, a door that had been left open now shut. The air in certain corners felt colder, heavy with a damp, earthy smell like soil after rain. I thought it might be mold or old insulation. I wanted it to be something simple. Then it followed me. It began one evening when I moved from the kitchen to the living room. The house was quiet except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. I had just sat down when I heard it, 3 knocks on the wall behind me. I froze, waited. Then as I stood up and walked toward the hallway, the sound repeated, on the opposite wall, matching my steps. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. The air felt colder than it should have. Every hair on my body stood up. I took a slow step backward, and the knocking moved again, 1 beat behind me, echoing through the wooden frame of the house. That was the first time I realized it wasn't random. It was following me. Every room I entered, it came with me. From the floorboards, from inside the walls, from the ceiling above. Always 3 knocks. Then silence, as if waiting for me to react. It was never loud, just loud enough to be heard clearly, to crawl under my skin and stay there. Sleep became impossible. Every night, I would lie in bed, eyes open, waiting. The knocking would start faintly somewhere down the hall, then move closer, room by room. It would stop just outside my door. Sometimes, I thought I could hear a faint scrape after the knocking, like nails dragging lightly along the wood. Once, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something tapping directly beneath my bed. The knocks were slow, patient, like it knew I was awake. The floorboards were cold when I stepped down, the air thick and stale, carrying that faint, metallic scent, like blood left too long in the open. I didn't turn on the light. Somehow, I knew that if I did, if I gave it my full attention, it would become real in a way that couldn't be undone. I just stood there listening. 3 knocks, then silence. After that night, I started hearing it even when I left the house. At work, at the grocery store, faintly from behind a wall, from under the floor. always distant but there. I tried to ignore it, but ignoring it seemed to make it louder. One evening, I decided to test it. I walked from the living room to the kitchen, stopping every few steps. Each time I stopped, the knocking followed, just a few seconds after. I tried to move quickly, suddenly changing direction. It followed anyway, slower but precise, as though tracing my path from inside the walls. It felt aware. That realization changed everything. I stopped trying to find a logical reason for it. I stopped pretending it was the pipes or the old wood. Deep down, I understood that it was none of those things. It was something else, something that had noticed me. Over the following days, the knocking began happening at random times, not just when I moved, but when I was still. Sometimes it came from the door frame, sometimes from the inside of the closet, sometimes directly behind my headboard as I tried to sleep. There were moments, brief ones, when I thought I could hear something between the knocks, a faint breathing, wet and uneven, like someone trying not to be heard. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I shouted into the silence, demanding it to stop, my voice echoing through the hollow rooms. For a long time, nothing happened. The air felt still, almost too still. Then, from the far corner of the house, I heard it. 3 knocks. Not from the walls, not from the ceiling, from the floor. It vibrated up through the wooden planks, slow and deliberate, as if something underneath the house was responding. I stepped back instinctively, my chest tight, the air feeling thinner. I could feel it, the awareness, the weight of something waiting just out of sight. The next morning, the house was colder. The walls seemed damp to the touch, and the smell of soil and rot was stronger. I didn't want to look, but part of me had to. I went outside, around to the crawl space beneath the house. The ground there was soft, sunken slightly in the middle, like something had been moving under it. I didn't go any closer. That night, the knocking started again, louder, faster, desperate. It moved through the walls, up the stairs, into the hallway outside my bedroom. I sat in the dark, frozen, listening as it came closer, door frame, wall, floor. Then it stopped. For the first time in weeks, there was complete silence. I almost cried from relief. But as I turned to lie down, I heard something new. A single knock. From inside the closet. The sound was softer than before, almost hesitant. Then, slowly, the door creaked open on its own, the old hinges groaning. The dark inside felt alive, pulsing faintly with the same rhythm as my heartbeat. I didn't move. I just stared, waiting for something to happen, but the darkness stayed still. And then one final knock. From behind me. That was the night I left. I didn't pack anything. I just walked out barefoot into the cold air. The grass was wet beneath my feet, the wind carrying that faint, metallic smell I had come to recognize. I didn't look back at the house. I couldn't. But even as I walked away, through the empty streets and past the dying trees, I could still hear it, faintly from somewhere close. 3 knocks. A pause. Then 2 more. Now, no matter where I go, I still hear it. In hotel rooms. In apartments. Sometimes, even in the silence before sleep. It doesn't matter where I am. It always finds me. Always knocking. Always waiting. And the worst part? It's getting closer again. I never used to wake up at exactly 3 in the morning. It wasn't a time that had ever meant anything to me. Not until it began happening night after night. Always the same way. I'd open my eyes in the dark, unsure why, my mind thick with sleep, the house silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator downstairs. Then the clock on my nightstand would glow that faint, sickly green, 3 a.m. And then, the 3 taps would come. Not immediately. Not loud. Just soft. Precise. Tap. 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 Always from somewhere different. The first time, I thought it was from the window. The second, from the closet door. The third, from beneath the bed. Each time, I tried to rationalize it. A loose pipe, the old house settling, a branch outside scraping against the glass. I told myself those things again and again, but deep down I could feel it. Something deliberate was happening. Something that wanted me awake at that hour. The house I lived in wasn't new. It was a creaking old thing with floors that sighed when I walked, with walls that seemed to breathe at night. When I moved in, The air always had this faint mustiness, like the smell of wood left damp for too long. The previous owner had left behind a few things: a cracked mirror, a wooden rocking chair, and a box of keys that didn't seem to fit any locks. I didn't think much of it at first. I kept mostly to the upstairs bedroom, with its single window overlooking the yard. I liked the quiet, but lately, that quiet had begun to feel wrong. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt full, like there was something standing inside it, listening. The first night the tapping began, I remember the feeling vividly, the stillness of the air, the way my heartbeat seemed to fill the room. 3 taps. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, holding my breath, eyes darting toward the window. The curtains barely moved, but the faint outline of branches outside swayed like fingers brushing the glass. I waited. Nothing followed. No wind, no sound, no continuation. Just those 3 taps. I didn't sleep much after that. The second night, it came again. Same time, same sound. But this time, it wasn't the window. It came from the closet, soft and rhythmic against the door. I stared at that dark wooden door for what felt like hours, the pale light from the alarm clock painting the edges of the room in dull green. The air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. I could hear my pulse in my ears, slow and thick. Then again, tap, tap, tap. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I waited for something else, a sound, a movement, anything, but nothing came. Just that triple knock, faint but exact. Almost polite. When morning finally came, the sunlight felt wrong too. Too bright, too sudden, like it didn't belong to the same world I'd been in hours before. I opened the closet, nothing inside but clothes. The air smelled faintly of dust and cedar. Still, I could swear the hangers were slightly swaying, as if recently disturbed. By the third night, I was expecting it. That was the worst part, waiting for it. I lay in bed, eyes open in the dark, staring at the ceiling, counting down the minutes. When the clock ticked over to 2:59, I could already feel it. That strange tension, like static gathering under my skin. The air seemed thicker again, heavy, unmoving. The house didn't feel like it was mine anymore. It felt occupied. At exactly 3 o'clock, I heard it. This time, it came from under the bed. It was slower this time. Heavier. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't the soft kind of tapping anymore. It had a faint, hollow tone to it, like bone against wood. My mouth went dry. My body refused to move. I just stared ahead, into the darkness where the floor vanished under the bed frame, imagining something down there, something lying flat, its hand reaching up to knock, softly reminding me that it knew I was awake. I didn't look under. I couldn't. I lay there until dawn, my muscles aching from staying so still. After that night, it never stopped. Sometimes it would come from the ceiling, sometimes the wall, sometimes even the floorboards near my feet. Always 3 taps, always 3 a.m. I stopped sleeping properly. I began leaving lights on, first the bedside lamp, then the hallway light, and eventually even the bathroom light. I told myself the light would make me feel safer, but it didn't. The tapping didn't care. It came anyway. I tried recording it once. I set my phone to record while I pretended to sleep. The next morning I played it back. There it was. 3 faint taps, and then something else. A long, slow inhale, right next to the microphone. I stopped the playback immediately and deleted the file. I told myself it was an audio glitch, some artifact of recording, but I couldn't ignore the way the hairs on my neck had risen when I heard it, because I knew exactly what that sound had felt like. That soft exhale of something too close. Something I'd felt on my cheek once, when I woke up one night and found the air around me colder than anywhere else in the room. Weeks went by, and I began to notice other things. Small shifts. The rocking chair in the corner would change its angle by a few inches. The mirror would have faint, smudged fingerprints that weren't mine. A key from the old box would appear on the floor beside my bed, though I hadn't touched that box in months. The air started to smell strange, metallic, like rain on rust. The house was colder too, even when the heater was running. Every sound, the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock, the creak of wood, seemed amplified. It was as though the house was listening. Then came the night when I finally broke. It was raining, a cold, thin rain that made the walls feel damp. I had fallen asleep for the first time in days, exhaustion pulling me under. When I woke, the room was still. The clock said 3 o'clock. My body tensed before the sound even came. I could feel it, deep inside me, that crawling anticipation. Then it started. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it wasn't from one direction. It came from everywhere. From the walls, from under the bed, from behind the door, from the ceiling above me. Like a dozen knuckles rapping gently, politely all around me. I sat up, heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my skull. The room seemed to shift in the dim light, the shadows moving slower than they should, like syrup dripping down a wall. The air smelled of old wood and wet earth. The temperature dropped until I could see the faintest hint of breath leaving my lips. And then, beneath all of it, I heard it, that same sound from the recording. A slow inhale. But this time, I could feel it moving. Closer. It was behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the faint green digits of the clock, listening as something exhaled against the back of my neck. A cold, damp breath that carried the faintest scent of soil and rot. Then the tapping started again. This time on the headboard, just behind my skull. Tap, tap, tap. I remember the feeling of my heart clawing at my ribs, the dizziness of terror, so pure it almost made me nauseous. I wanted to scream, to move, to run, but all I could do was sit there, trembling, while that invisible presence continued its steady, patient rhythm. 3 taps. Always 3. Never more. Never less. When morning came, I didn't move for hours. The sunlight looked wrong again, pale, colorless. The room felt drained. The mirror across from my bed was fogged up, like someone had been standing too close, breathing on it for a long time. In the condensation, there were 3 faint marks, side by side, like fingertips pressed into the glass. I packed a bag that day. I told myself I'd leave, stay at a hotel, maybe find a new apartment altogether. But when night came, I hesitated. It wasn't fear of what was in the house anymore. It was fear of what would follow if I left. Because I'd begun to notice something else. The tapping didn't always wait for 3 a.m. anymore. Sometimes it came earlier. Sometimes it came when I was sitting downstairs, or brushing my teeth, or walking past a mirror. Always soft, always polite, always 3. Tap, tap, tap. Sometimes from behind me, sometimes from inside the walls. And once, I swear I heard it from inside my pillow. It's been months now. I've stopped checking the clock. I've stopped trying to sleep. The lights stay on all night, but it doesn't make a difference. The tapping knows where I am. It knows when I'm awake. It knows when I try to ignore it. And sometimes, just before it begins, I can feel that breath again, cold and damp, brushing against my skin, as if something is leaning close, reminding me it's still here. It's 2:59 now. The air feels heavy again. The silence is thick, and I know what's coming. 3 taps. Always 3. Tap, tap, tap. I rented the cabin because I wanted silence. That's what I told myself when I packed up my car, left the city, and drove until the highway became a dirt road swallowed by trees. I was tired of people, of the endless hum of engines, of conversations that led nowhere. I wanted to be alone, completely alone. And the listing said the cabin by the lake had no neighbors. The drive took longer than I expected. The sun had already sunk low, turning the woods into tall silhouettes pressing in on both sides of the road. My tires crunched over gravel, then soft dirt. I remember slowing down when I saw the narrow wooden sign half buried under moss. Lake Huron Cabin, private property. The arrow pointed left, into a path that barely looked like a road at all. Branches brushed against my windshield. I could hear the occasional tap of pine needles against the glass. The forest was alive, but not in the way I was used to. No traffic, no people. Just the faint whisper of wind moving through trees, so tall they blocked most of the fading light. By the time I reached the cabin, the sky was dark violet. The lake stretched out beyond the trees like a black mirror, perfectly still. The cabin was smaller than I imagined, 1 floor, wooden, and leaning slightly as if age had pulled it toward the earth. The roof sagged near the middle. The windows reflected nothing but shadow. When I stepped out of the car, the air hit me cold, heavy, smelling of damp wood and old water. The kind of smell that sits deep in the lungs. My boots sank slightly into the soil, which was soft and uneven, as though the ground had been turned over recently. Inside, the cabin felt preserved, like someone had locked the door years ago and never returned. Dust clung to the air. There was a single wooden table near the window, 2 chairs, a rusted stove, and a bed in the corner with a thin gray blanket draped over it. I could hear the faint drip of water somewhere inside the walls. It wasn't leaking, it was something else. A rhythmic tap, spaced out perfectly. When I lit a candle on the table, the flame flickered violently before settling. The shadows in the corners moved like something breathing. That first night, I didn't sleep well. I kept hearing something from outside. It wasn't an animal, it was too slow, too intentional. Like footsteps moving through wet grass, circling the cabin once, pausing, then moving again. Every time I tried to convince myself it was the lake shifting or branches falling, another sound came, closer. I lay still listening. The boards beneath the cabin creaked softly, like someone walking underneath. Then silence. The next morning, the world was calm again. Mist covered the lake like a white veil, and for a moment, everything looked peaceful. I made coffee on the small gas burner, stepped outside, and stood by the edge of the water. There was no dock, no boat, just the faint lapping of water against stone. The air smelled faintly metallic, like iron or blood. I scanned the tree line, expecting to see another cabin, a road, something, but there was nothing. Just forest stretching endlessly. It felt as though the world had shrunk, and the only things that existed were the cabin, the lake, and me. That afternoon, I decided to explore. I followed a narrow path that curved around the lake, the kind of trail that had been carved by animals or forgotten hikers. The deeper I went, the quieter it became. Not just quiet, empty. Even the insects seemed to avoid that place. After walking for nearly an hour, I found something strange. An old foundation buried under moss and dirt. The remains of another cabin, collapsed walls, pieces of furniture turned black with rot. It must have been decades old. What struck me most was the fact that it was almost identical in size and shape to the cabin I was staying in. There were signs of something burned. Charred wood, melted glass, the faint smell of ash that shouldn't still be there after so long. And beneath the rubble, I saw something that froze me. A door, half buried, leading underground. The wood was swollen and dark with age, but intact. I didn't open it. I just stood there, staring, until I realized how long I'd been holding my breath. The air felt heavier there, thicker, like it carried weight. I turned back before the sun set. When I returned, something felt different. The cabin door was open. Just slightly. I knew I'd closed it before leaving. I remembered locking it. The metal latch was still hooked, but the door itself had been pushed inward, as though someone had tried to enter and stopped halfway. Inside, nothing seemed touched, but the candle I'd left on the table had melted all the way down. Its wax had pooled onto the wood, solidifying into strange patterns. Circular lines, like rings. That night, I tried not to think about it. I sat on the bed, writing in my notebook, listening to the sound of the wind outside. But the wind wasn't steady. It came in short bursts, followed by silence, and then tapping. 3 soft taps against the wall near my bed. Then again, slower this time. I pressed my ear to the wood. Nothing. Just a faint vibration, like something small moving within the walls. I thought maybe it was a mouse, until I remembered how far the cabin was from everything. I hadn't seen a single animal since arriving. When I tried to sleep again, I heard it once more, but this time from the ceiling. The sound of something dragging, slow and deliberate, as if crawling across the roof. The boards above me creaked softly, and then stopped directly over where I was lying. Silence stretched so long that I began to believe it was my imagination. Then, one single tap. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, the air felt wrong. The light outside was pale, almost gray. The mist didn't lift from the lake, and the water looked darker than before. I walked around the cabin, searching for tracks, anything that could explain what I'd heard. But the ground was untouched. Not a single footprint, not even my own from the day before. It was as if the earth had reset overnight. That afternoon, I noticed something else. From the front porch, if I stared across the lake long enough, I could see a shape. A cabin, barely visible through the fog, on the opposite shore. Identical to mine. But that couldn't be right. The listing had said no neighbors. The property records had shown only one structure. Yet there it was, same roofline, same angle, same reflection in the water. I stood there until the sun began to dip, watching that faint outline. It didn't move, didn't flicker. But the longer I stared, the less sure I became that it was a cabin at all. That night, the tapping came back. Louder. From all sides this time. It moved from one wall to another, circling me again like before. The boards beneath me shuddered as if something was crawling underneath, dragging itself through the soil. The air smelled of damp rot, of something old and buried. I felt it then, not fear, but realization. That whatever was making that sound wasn't outside. It was inside the walls. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it along the corners, across the floorboards, over the cracks near the window frames. For a second, the beam caught something, small, pale, like a hand pressed against the glass from the inside. When I blinked, it was gone. The tapping stopped, replaced by a new sound, breathing. Shallow, wet, close. I could hear it coming from beneath the floor, steady and human. I didn't move for hours. I just sat on the floor, knees pulled to my chest, watching the door. I expected it to open at any second, but it never did. The sound faded slowly, replaced once again by silence. The next morning, I decided to leave. I packed my things, walked outside, and froze. Across the lake, the other cabin was gone. No outline, no shadow, nothing. Just fog and water. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove. The path out felt longer than before, the trees thicker, the air heavier. I never looked back, but halfway down the road, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. For just a second, through the reflection of my back window, I could see the lake again, and there, standing at the edge of the water, was a figure. Still unmoving. Watching. I couldn't make out its face. When I finally reached the highway, the world felt normal again. Cars passed, birds flew overhead, and the noise of life returned. But that night, when I got home, I noticed something strange on the side of my car. Handprints. Small, wet, and pale. And when I looked at my phone to check the pictures I'd taken of the lake, every photo showed the same thing in the distance. Not a reflection. Not a second cabin. Just a dark shape, standing in the water. Watching. Always watching. It was one of those winters that felt older than the land itself. One that seemed to remember things we had long forgotten. The kind of cold that didn't just bite at your skin but seeped through it, sinking deep into the bones until even your thoughts started to move slower, heavier. I had taken a seasonal caretaker job for a small cabin in northern Montana, tucked somewhere between a forest that never stopped whispering and a frozen lake that seemed to stretch forever. It wasn't supposed to be difficult. Keep the generator running, make sure the pipes didn't freeze, check the roof after every heavy snowfall. They told me I'd have complete solitude, which, at the time, sounded like peace. I wanted quiet. I wanted a break from the constant hum of people. But quiet isn't always peace. Sometimes it's something else entirely. The first few days were uneventful. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms and a narrow hallway leading to a back porch that faced the lake. The interior smelled faintly of pine sap and dust. When I stepped on the wooden floorboards, they gave out a long, tired creak that echoed into the empty air. Every sound seemed amplified. The ticking of the clock on the wall, the sigh of the wind slipping through the gaps in the window frames, the low hum of the generator outside. By the third night, the first snowstorm rolled in. It came without warning, thick, swirling flakes that swallowed the world outside. When I opened the front door to look, it was like staring into a curtain of white noise. The cold clawed at my face, and in a matter of seconds, everything, trees, fences, the path leading to the lake, vanished under a blanket of snow. That night, I slept lightly. The storm pressed against the windows, making the walls moan. I could hear the sound of snow sliding off the roof in heavy thumps. Every so often, I'd catch something else, a faint tapping, like small fingers brushing against the window pane. It might have been branches. It might not have. In the morning, the world was silent. Not the kind of silence you notice, but the kind that swallows you whole. Even the wind had gone still. When I stepped outside, the air felt thick and hollow. Everything was white, untouched. The snow covered the porch, the yard, even the path to the lake. Not a single mark disturbed it. No footprints. Not even my own at first. I remember blinking down, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. But when I stepped off the porch, the snow didn't give way. It didn't sink. My boot pressed against it, but it was like stepping onto something solid. Cold, yes, but unmoving. I pressed harder, testing my weight. The snow didn't compress. No indentation. No trace. It was impossible. I spent hours that day walking the perimeter of the cabin, trying to understand it. Every step left nothing. I ran my gloved hand across the snow's surface. It was real, granular wet. I could scoop it up, throw it, feel it melt against my skin. But once it hit the ground again, it was as though it never existed. The sun set early that evening. By 5, the sky had turned the color of ash, and the lake had become a sheet of dull glass. I built a fire in the wood stove and sat by it, listening to the popping of the logs. The heat was comforting, but it didn't reach far. Beyond the circle of firelight, the room seemed to darken unnaturally fast. And then, there was that sound again. From outside, a faint scraping, like something dragging across the porch. I froze. It continued for maybe 10 seconds, slow, deliberate, like claws or heavy nails. Then silence. I went to the window, though I can't explain why. Maybe I expected to see an animal. Maybe I just wanted proof that I wasn't imagining it. But when I looked out, the porch was empty. The snow still perfect, undisturbed. No footprints. No marks. Nothing. That night, the generator cut out for the first time. I woke to complete darkness, the kind where even your own hands feel like they've vanished. I could hear the wind again, soft and uneven, like someone breathing outside the walls. I sat up in bed, listening. My heart was hammering, every beat loud enough to fill the cabin. Then came the sound. Not from outside this time. From beneath the floorboards. It started faint, just a slow, rhythmic tapping. But as the seconds passed, it grew louder, closer. I pressed my hand to the wooden floor. It felt cold. The tapping stopped. Then from the corner of the room, something shifted, a weight pressing gently against the wood, like someone crawling just below me. I wanted to tell myself it was a trapped animal, a raccoon maybe. But the sound wasn't erratic. It moved with intent. I sat there in the dark until the first hints of gray light began to seep through the window. When morning came, I forced myself outside. I needed to check the generator, the crawl space, something. Anything to explain the night before. The air was still. My breath hung in front of me like fog that refused to fade. The generator had shut off because of ice buildup, nothing unusual. But when I walked around to the side of the cabin, my stomach dropped. There, under the narrow crawl space, the snow was smooth. Impossibly smooth. No animal tracks, no marks of disturbance. Just that strange, pristine surface. But near the center, directly beneath where my bed would have been, something was slightly off. The snow bulged upward, as if something underneath had pushed against it. And it was moving. Only a fraction. Barely visible unless you stared. But it was moving. I didn't go back under there. I couldn't. I went inside, packed what I could, and waited by the front door, watching the horizon for any sign of the supply truck. It was supposed to come every 3 days. It didn't come that day, or the day after. The storm had probably buried the road. By the 5th day, I stopped keeping track of time. The firewood was running low. The silence outside had changed. It wasn't just empty anymore, it felt heavy, like something was pressing against the cabin from all sides, listening. At one point, I opened the door again, just to see. The snow had deepened, though it still showed no prints. Not mine, not anything else's. The air smelled strange now, like wet metal. I remember looking out toward the lake, and for the briefest moment, I saw something standing on the ice. It wasn't shaped right. It was tall, too tall and thin. Its limbs looked stretched, wrong, bending where they shouldn't. The moment my eyes fixed on it, the air around me felt different, thicker, charged, as though the space itself had noticed me. I blinked, and it was gone. But that night, when I lay down, I could hear it. Not outside anymore. Not under the floor. Inside. A faint sound, slow and patient, moving just beyond where the firelight reached. I could hear the floorboards groan, the air shift. My own breathing felt too loud. The smell of iron was stronger now, coming from nowhere, from everywhere. When I dared to look, I saw it again. Not fully. Just the outline. A shadow darker than the dark itself, standing near the doorway. It didn't move, but it was closer than before. I stayed frozen for hours, staring, waiting for it to vanish. But it never did. It just stood there, silent, unmoving, watching. By morning, it was gone. And when I stepped outside again, the snow finally showed footprints. But they weren't mine. They led from the porch to the treeline, deep impressions that pressed far into the frozen surface. The steps were uneven, like someone or something dragged itself forward with effort. I followed them for a while. I shouldn't have. But curiosity, or maybe something else, pulled me along. The prints led all the way to the lake. And then they stopped. Just like that, right at the edge of the ice. No return path. No hole. Just ended. The wind picked up then, carrying a low, hollow sound from across the frozen water. It wasn't a howl. It wasn't the cracking of ice. It was something like a whisper. And the snow around my feet on the lake, in every direction, was once again flawless. Smooth. Unbroken. As though nothing had ever walked there at all. Sometimes I still dream about that place. The smell of cold pine. The weight of the silence pressing against my chest. I wake up sweating, heart pounding, certain that if I look out my window, I'll see it again, something standing motionless in the snow. And every winter, when the first snowfall comes, I always look down, waiting to see my footprints. Just to make sure they're still there. Because one day, I know they won't be. The first time I saw it, I thought it was a trick of the light. The frost on the bathroom window had formed thick that morning, white, grainy layers that blurred everything outside. The kind of cold that makes your breath visible even indoors, hanging in the air before dissolving. I remember standing there shirtless, the heater dead silent, my skin prickling from the chill that slipped through the cracks around the window. The house had always been cold, even when it shouldn't be. The kind of cold that clings to walls, that doesn't care about blankets or thermostats. A winter home built decades ago, with thin pipes that creaked at night and floors that shifted like something beneath was moving too. I was staying there alone. The place belonged to my aunt. She had passed away a few months before, and I'd agreed to stay for a while to take care of things. Empty houses don't like being empty for long, she used to say. Maybe she was right. That morning, I had been brushing my teeth when I noticed the outline. Just behind the frosted glass of the bathroom window, something darker than the white blur of ice, standing still. It was faint, distorted, as though the frost itself was shaping it into a face. Two dim patches where eyes should be. A faint curve where a mouth could be. I stared. The sound of the running faucet felt too loud, too sharp. I reached forward and wiped part of the glass with my hand, expecting to reveal nothing. Maybe a branch, maybe a shadow. But outside, the yard was empty. The snow untouched. No footprints. That image stayed in my head all day. That faint, ghostly suggestion of a human face behind the frost. I told myself it was just the way the condensation formed. Just my mind searching for shapes, like seeing animals in clouds. But the next morning, the face was there again. Only this time it was clearer. It wasn't something random anymore. It had features. The frost around the window seemed thicker, heavier near the center. It framed that shape, pale against the light outside. The eyes were darker. The mouth looked as if it had curved, slightly downward, frozen in place. I didn't touch the glass that time. I couldn't bring myself to. The house had that same dead quiet it always did, the kind that makes your own movements sound foreign. I could hear the soft groan of the pipes, the low hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, and outside, the faint rustle of wind brushing against the walls. But behind that glass, something about the stillness was wrong. It wasn't just cold. It was watching. I turned away, refusing to look again, and finished washing up as fast as I could. Yet, as I reached for the towel, I thought I heard it, the faintest sound from behind the glass. Like a dull tap. Not loud, not forceful. Just a slow, deliberate touch. I froze. The air felt heavier. I waited for another sound, a branch scraping, a gust of wind, but nothing came. Just silence. When I finally glanced back, the face was gone. That night, I kept thinking about it, about how the frost seemed to grow thicker every morning, spreading further across the window, as if something was on the other side, breathing against the glass. I tried not to think of it as anything alive, but when I went to bed, I left the bathroom light on. The light flickered faintly from under the door, casting soft shadows that reached across the hallway. I lay there listening. The house expanded and contracted with the temperature, the wooden frame popping softly. But then came a sound that didn't belong. 3 slow taps. They came from the direction of the bathroom. It was faint, but distinct enough that I couldn't mistake it. I sat up, the air feeling colder than before. I didn't move for a long time. My breath formed small clouds in front of me. When I finally got up, the floorboards felt like ice under my feet. The sound didn't repeat. But as I stood by the bathroom door, I could feel it, the cold pressing through the thin wood. I reached for the light switch and pushed the door open just enough to look inside. The frost on the window was so thick it looked like snow had built up inside. And in the center of that pale surface was the face, clearer than ever. It was no longer an outline. The features had depth now, like the frost had molded itself to form cheeks, a nose, the hollow shapes of eyes. The face wasn't peaceful. It looked as though it was pressed up against the glass, straining to look through. I stood there for what felt like forever, staring at it. There was no sound, no movement. Just that image staring back. And the longer I looked, the more I began to notice something else. Faint marks at the edges of the frost, like fingertips. 4 of them, curved upward, as if something outside had touched the glass. But that couldn't be. There were no footprints in the snow. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch, wrapped in my coat, watching the window near the front door. Every so often, I thought I heard faint shifts in the wind. Not howling, but whispering, moving too rhythmically like breath passing close to the walls. By morning, I was exhausted. My coffee went cold in my hands before I could even drink it. But I still went to the bathroom, needing to see if the frost had melted or changed. The window was still covered, but the face was gone. For a moment, I felt relief. The kind that feels too easy. I wiped the glass clean, clearing a small circle. The cold stung my fingertips. Outside, the same pale yard. The same still trees. Except, near the edge of the house, something new. 4 faint depressions in the snow. Not deep enough to be footprints, more like something pressed upward from beneath. I stayed by the window for a long time after that, staring at those shallow marks. The thought came slow, uninvited. What if it hadn't been outside the glass at all? What if it had been pressed from within the frost? That night, the temperature dropped even lower. The pipes howled softly as I tried to sleep. I kept the lights on again, even though it made the shadows worse. At some point past midnight, I woke up to another sound. Not tapping this time. Scratching. It came from inside the walls. Faint, irregular, dragging upward toward the ceiling. It stopped every time I tried to focus on it, then started again the moment I turned away. I didn't move from the bed, not even to breathe deeply. When it finally went quiet, I realized how cold the room had become. The air stung my throat. I could see frost forming at the corners of the window in my bedroom, even though it was double-paned. The white grew slowly, like a spreading bloom. Then a shape began to form. The same faint impression I'd seen before, blurred, vague, but unmistakably human. Only now it was inside. The frost was on my side of the glass. I backed away slowly, my heart pounding, my breath fogging the air. The shape stayed still for a long time. Then, as I watched, it began to fade. Not melting, dissolving. Like it was sinking into the glass. I didn't sleep after that. I couldn't. For the next 2 days, the house stayed unbearably cold. The frost spread further, not just on windows now, but creeping along corners, across tiles, around door frames. It had a strange smell too, faint but sharp like old metal. I thought about leaving, but something about the house felt like it didn't want me to. Every sound made me stop. Every shadow made me wait. On the 3rd morning, I went to the bathroom again. The mirror was fogged, the walls were damp, and the frost on the window had formed thick as ever. And there it was again, the face, pressed so close to the glass that the shape of its nose, its lips, its hollow eyes were nearly perfect. But this time, the frost was on the inside. The handprints too, for long streaks trailing downward, as though someone had dragged their fingers through the condensation. And beneath the frost, through the faint blur of light, I thought I saw movement. Slow, breathing. The face seemed to shift. The mouth opened slightly, not enough to show detail, but enough to feel like it was trying to speak. The air was so cold I could hear the crack of my breath as I exhaled. My hands shook as I reached for the door, but before I could leave, the frost on the glass began to melt from within. Thin rivulets ran down the surface, from the eyes first. It looked like the glass itself was crying. That was when I left the house. I didn't pack. I didn't even take my coat. I just ran. Down the hall, through the front door, into the snow that reached up to my ankles. I didn't stop until I was far enough to see the house from a distance, its windows glinting pale in the dawn light. And through that frost-covered bathroom window, I swear I could still see it, faint, but there a shape pressed to the glass, watching. I never went back. My relatives handled the rest. The house was sold eventually. No one mentioned anything unusual. But sometimes, when winter comes, and the glass in my apartment fogs from the cold, I catch myself staring at it for too long. And sometimes, when the light hits just right, I think I see it again, faintly, gently, a pale outline forming just behind the frost. Not outside, but looking in. I moved into the house at the edge of town because it was quiet. That was the point. I needed somewhere still, somewhere that didn't hum with the noise of traffic or neighbors or sirens. I wanted silence, real silence, the kind that hums in your ears until it feels alive. The house had been empty for years. You could tell by the way the floorboards seemed to sigh when I stepped on them, by the smell that hung in the air, something between dust and forgotten laundry, the faint sweetness of rot hiding under wood polish. It wasn't a big place. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, the kind of house where sound had nowhere to hide. I thought that was comforting at first. But I started hearing things within a week. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't footsteps in the attic or creaking stairs or anything cliché like that. It was more internal. The kind of sound you feel before you understand it. A soft vibration behind the drywall, like something was brushing against it from the inside. At first, I thought it was mice. Or maybe the pipes expanding. It made sense. The walls were old. The house had been sitting cold for years. But the noises didn't fit that explanation. They didn't echo or move the way a mouse scurrying through insulation would. They pulsed. They tapped. They almost followed me. I would sit in the living room, and there it was, a dull scrape just behind my left ear, faint enough that I could almost convince myself it was my imagination. Then when I moved to the kitchen, it followed, soft, dragging, like fingertips brushing the inside of the wall. At night, the sounds changed. When the lights were off and the air grew still, I could hear breathing. Not clear or distinct, not like a person standing in the room, but low, deep, uneven. As if the house itself had lungs that struggled to pull air through plaster. The sound seemed to move through the structure, as though something was crawling slowly, exploring the spaces that weren't meant to be accessible. There's a crawl space under the floorboards, barely 2 feet of clearance. I checked it the second night, just to be sure. My flashlight beam caught old insulation, cobwebs, a few broken bricks near the foundation. No sign of life. Yet when I lay in bed that same night, I could swear I heard something shifting under me. The smell was next. A faint metallic scent, like blood left too long in air. It seeped from the walls themselves, spreading slow and sour through the house. I scrubbed every surface, burned candles, opened every window, but it always came back, heavier at night. Sometimes I'd catch it right as the sound started again, the slow dragging from behind the plaster. The wall seemed to hum faintly when it happened, as if the sound resonated through the studs, through the nails, through the structure itself. I pressed my ear to the wall once, just to prove it was in my head. It wasn't. There was movement, soft, deliberate, and under that, a kind of wet clicking sound. I could feel it through the drywall, vibrations that weren't mechanical, weren't rodent-like. Something thicker, something slow and patient. I jerked away when I realized the tapping rhythm had matched the beat of my own heartbeat, perfectly, like it was mimicking it. After that, the house never felt empty again. Every sound had weight. Every silence felt expectant. I could almost sense the thing inside, not watching but listening, the way a creature does when it knows you're near. One night, as I was sitting at the kitchen table, I heard the sound again, behind the wall directly in front of me. Not scraping this time, not movement, just tapping. 3 short, deliberate taps. Then silence. Then again, slightly lower, closer to the floor. It wasn't random anymore. It was testing, communicating. I stayed still, the kind of stillness that hurts. My eyes fixed on the spot where the noise had come from. The wallpaper was slightly discolored there, darker, like moisture had soaked into it long ago. Another tap, this time directly behind the electrical outlet. I reached out without realizing it, fingers trembling. The wall was warm. That was the moment I knew. Whatever was inside wasn't a rat or a pipe or anything natural. There was heat radiating from it, pulsing faintly like something alive. I slept on the couch that night. The sound continued, faint but constant, crawling from wall to wall as if tracing the boundaries of the room. Over the following days, I noticed other changes. The house seemed to shift in temperature. Some corners would feel freezing cold, while others, especially near the walls that made noise, felt humid and heavy, like breath trapped under fabric. I began to see faint bulges in the wallpaper, as though something underneath was pushing outward. One afternoon, I tore away a small section of it, just enough to look inside. Behind the plaster, there was no insulation, no wood lath, just empty darkness. A void that shouldn't have been there. The air that came out was warm and smelled faintly of rot and soil. That night, I dreamt that the walls were breathing. Each inhale made the wallpaper tighten. Each exhale pushed it outward until it rippled like thin skin. When I woke up, the sheets were damp, and for a moment, I thought I heard my own name being whispered through the drywall. It got worse. The sound began to come from multiple directions at once. Upstairs, behind the kitchen cabinets, inside the bathroom wall. I could hear it echo faintly through the pipes, through the vents, like the entire structure had become hollow. Sometimes, in the very early hours, when everything was quiet enough that even the refrigerator stopped humming, I could hear a faint rhythm beneath the stillness. Like a heart. Slow. Heavy. It made the glasses on the counter tremble just slightly. I tried recording it once. set my phone against the wall, waited for the sound to start. But when I played it back, all I heard was static. Faintly underneath the noise, though, there was something else, a voice distant, warped, almost swallowed by the distortion. It said my name. I didn't sleep after that. The smell worsened. It wasn't just metallic anymore. It was earthy, decayed, like soil soaked in something once alive. I found dark stains along the baseboards, seeping outward from the seams. When I tried to clean them, the rag came away dark red. The walls began to pulse. Not visibly, not yet, but you could feel it when you leaned close, the faint throb of something moving deeper within, slow and patient, like veins carrying thick blood. I started to think the house wasn't haunted, not in the way people imagine. It wasn't a ghost or a spirit trapped within. It was the house itself, or something that had merged with it, something that used its structure like a body. It became possessive. When I tried to leave for a few nights, just to get space, the doors swelled, sticking to their frames as though moisture had warped them. The locks jammed. Windows refused to open. I could hear the walls creak, slow and deep, as if protesting my attempt to leave. That was the first night the wall moved. It happened just past midnight. The sound came again, scraping, sliding, but this time it was followed by a low groan. I looked up and saw the wallpaper bulging outward near the ceiling, swelling like something was pushing from behind. The plaster cracked faintly. Dust fell. The bulge moved, slow, steady, like something dragging its way upward inside the wall cavity. Then it stopped. The silence that followed was thick, pressing, alive. I could hear my heartbeat pounding against my ribs, matching the rhythm I used to hear from the wall. Then, faintly, the sound returned, behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I knew then that it wasn't outside the house trying to get in. It had always been inside, waiting for someone to stay long enough to listen. Now the walls breathe with me. They shift when I move. The smell is permanent, soaked into everything I own. At night, I can feel warmth radiating from the walls around my bed, hear faint murmurs beneath the plaster. Wet, rhythmic, patient. I stopped fighting it weeks ago. The sound doesn't frighten me anymore. It's constant, almost comforting, like a pulse you can't live without. Sometimes, when I rest my hand against the wall, it feels like another hand presses back from the other side. Not forceful, not violent, just familiar. And sometimes, late at night, when the house grows still, I swear I can hear something whisper. Not through the air, but through the walls themselves. It says it's been here all along, waiting, listening. And now that I've heard it, I belong to it too. Because something was inside the walls, not outside. And it's still there, breathing, waiting for whoever comes next to listen closely enough. There was something wrong with the building long before I moved in. I could feel it the first time I stepped inside. The air was still in a way that didn't feel natural. Not the stillness of peace or quiet, but the kind that feels aware of you, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. It was an old apartment complex just outside the city, wedged between a set of abandoned shops and a half-collapsed parking structure. The rent was unbelievably cheap, and the landlord didn't ask too many questions. The hallways were narrow, with yellowing wallpaper that curled at the corners. The faint scent of dust and wet plaster hung permanently in the air. Every time I walked down those halls, I could hear the sound of my own footsteps echoing unevenly, as if someone else was walking slightly out of rhythm behind me. My unit was on the 3rd floor, apartment 3B. The building only went up 4 stories, but it felt taller from the inside, the stairwell twisting tighter than it should have, each landing a little darker than the last. The bulbs overhead hummed faintly, casting that sickly amber glow that never felt fully bright. The door to my apartment stuck when I first tried to open it. The wood was swollen, like it had soaked up years of moisture. When I finally pushed it open, the smell hit me, something metallic mixed with mold and something faintly sweet like rotting fruit. The window in the living room faced an alley, blocked mostly by the opposite wall of the next building. Barely any sunlight ever reached inside. There was one thing I noticed immediately, though I didn't think much of it at first. There was no fire escape. Every other building on that block had one, rusted iron structures clinging to brick like skeletal vines. But outside my window there was nothing, just a blank wall of cracked concrete. I figured maybe it had been removed years ago, or was built before codes required one. It didn't really bother me then. The nights were the worst part. You could hear things in that building after midnight. Pipes that didn't sound like pipes, shuffling in the walls, or footsteps above, even though no one lived on the top floor anymore. Sometimes, I'd wake to the faint tapping of metal against plaster, like something small was moving just inside the wall behind my bed. When I pressed my ear to it, the sound would stop. But the wall felt warm, too warm for a building that was always so cold. I started noticing stains on the ceiling, long, brownish trails that grew darker every week. The landlord blamed a broken pipe, but when I checked with the tenant above me, no one answered. Their mailbox downstairs was overflowing. No one had seen them for months. One night, I woke up to the sound of something scraping across the window. A dry, uneven drag. I froze in bed, staring at the faint outline of the curtain moving slightly. The scratching continued, steady and deliberate. But when I finally gathered the courage to pull the curtain back, there was nothing there. Just the empty wall opposite. I pressed my forehead to the glass and looked down. No ledge, no ladder, no fire escape. Just the narrow, empty alleyway far below, cloaked in shadow. Still, the marks were there the next morning. Thin, white scratches along the outside of the glass, too high to reach from the ground. After that, the smell got worse. It wasn't mold anymore. It was sour, heavy like something long dead. I checked under the sink, behind the refrigerator, even in the air vents. Nothing. The stench seemed to come from the walls themselves. Sometimes I thought I could hear faint, wet noises coming from inside them, a soft sloshing, like something moving through thick liquid. A few weeks in, the power began to flicker. Lights dimmed without reason, appliances hummed louder than normal, and sometimes the radio would turn on by itself, whispering static even when unplugged. I remember one morning, I walked into the kitchen to find the light swinging slowly from the ceiling, as if someone had just brushed past it. It was around that time I realized something deeply unsettling. From the street below, the window to my apartment couldn't be seen. I tried looking for it. I stood across the alley, tracing the rows of windows one by one, counting carefully. But where mine should have been, there was just solid brick. I even checked from different angles. No sign of it. My window didn't exist from the outside. I moved back and forth between both buildings that afternoon, trying to make sense of it. The geometry didn't fit. The space where my room should have been didn't line up with the exterior wall. It was as if the entire unit, 3B, had been built into some impossible pocket, and in between place the rest of the structure didn't acknowledge. That night, the noises changed. It wasn't scratching anymore. It was breathing, shallow, rhythmic, coming from the vents. I could hear it moving, sometimes near the kitchen, sometimes the hallway. It wasn't the sound of the building settling. It was too deliberate, too human. I tried to leave, but when I opened my front door, the hallway lights were dead. The air felt wrong, thick, almost pressurized. The carpet was damp beneath my feet, and the smell of wet copper filled the corridor. I could barely see the end of the hall, though I knew it was only 20 feet away. There was something about that darkness that felt alive, pulsing faintly, as if something deep inside it was breathing too. I shut the door and shoved a chair against it. I stayed awake until sunrise, though I never really saw the light. It never reached inside properly. Even in daylight, my apartment remained in a kind of twilight haze. Eventually, I decided to move out. But when I called the landlord, the number disconnected. When I went down to the office, the door was boarded up. The name on the sign outside, Marin Properties, had been half peeled away, the metal beneath corroded to a dull green. A neighbor told me the company had gone bankrupt years ago. No one managed the building anymore. But my rent checks were being cashed. On my last night there, I started packing. It was quiet except for the occasional hum from the refrigerator. Then came the soft knock. It wasn't from the door. It came from the wall, the same one behind the headboard. 3 slow taps. Then silence. Then 3 more. I pressed my hand against the plaster. It was warm again. Too warm. Beneath it, I could hear something faint, the sound of movement, like something shifting just behind the surface. It felt almost close enough to push through. I moved my hand down, tracing the wall's uneven surface. In the dim light, I noticed a faint outline, a vertical line, maybe an old seam or a boarded-over vent. But when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't that. It was a door, or at least something that used to be one. The edges were sealed, painted over again and again, but the shape was there. Human-sized, too narrow for a normal doorway. I don't know why I did it, but I started picking at the edge with a knife. The paint flaked off in chunks, revealing old wood beneath. Dry, splintered, and strangely soft, like something that had been exposed to moisture for years. As I dug deeper, the smell poured out, thick and putrid like decay trapped in a jar. The sound came next, wet movement, slow and deliberate. And then breathing. Not mine, Not human. I dropped the knife and stumbled back. The wall pulsed once, a faint shudder through the wood and plaster. Something pushed against it from the other side, a soft bulge like a hand pressing outward. The shape stayed there for a moment, 5 distinct points, and then it slid upward, vanishing into the ceiling. The lights went out. I don't remember running. I only remember waking up outside, sitting on the cracked pavement of the alley behind the building, the dawn just beginning to gray the sky. My hands were raw, my nails broken. I looked up at the wall, the one that should have had my window, and it was still solid. No glass. No sign of anything. Just brick. I never went back for my things. The police said the building was condemned and due for demolition. They couldn't find any record of apartment 3B in the blueprints. The third floor, according to city plans, only had 3 units, A, C, and D. There was never a B. But I lived there. I know I did. I still have the key, small, rusted, with the number 3B scratched faintly into the metal. Sometimes I swear it feels warm in my hand, like something on the other side of that wall still remembers me. And when the night is quiet enough, if I hold the key up to my ear, I can still hear it, faint, steady, the sound of breathing, from inside the wall. There are certain moments in life that brand themselves into your mind, so deeply that even years later you can still smell the air, feel the weight of the silence, and hear the sound of your own heart. For me, that moment happened the night something spoke my name from the darkness, and it wasn't anyone I knew. It began in the house I grew up in, a narrow, uneven structure with walls that groaned during the night, as if remembering the weight of something they once held. The air inside was always a little colder than it should have been. Even in summer, when the world outside boiled and shimmered, the air in that place felt unmoved, heavy, thick, unmoving, like something invisible lingered in every corner, breathing beside you unseen. I was alone most nights back then. My parents worked late, and by the time they returned, the house was already asleep in that unnatural stillness. I had grown used to the creaks of the floorboards, the distant hum of the old refrigerator, even the faint scratching from behind the walls. The kind of noises you eventually stop questioning if you hear them long enough. But that night, the sound was different. It started as a shuffle, a dragging motion against the wooden floor, soft at first, distant, like someone slowly moving their feet just beyond the hallway. I remember freezing halfway through turning a page in the book I was reading. The sound wasn't rhythmic like footsteps. It wasn't even hurried. It was slow, deliberate, and wrong in some way I couldn't explain. The hallway in that house always felt longer than it looked. When you stood at one end, it seemed to stretch forever into the shadows, its far end swallowed by darkness, no matter how many lights you turned on. And from that darkness, the noise continued, closer this time, though still faint. The book in my hands trembled. The silence between sounds stretched thin. I told myself it was the house settling, a loose board expanding in the cold, the sort of harmless thing you learn to ignore. But then the sound stopped completely, and in the thick quiet that followed, I heard something else. Breathing. It wasn't mine. It came from the hallway, shallow, uneven, the faint inhale and exhale of something standing just out of sight. It didn't sound human. It was too wet, too slow, each breath dragging as though forced through waterlogged lungs. For a long time, I didn't move. I just sat there listening, every nerve screaming. The air grew colder. I could feel it spreading across the room, pressing against my skin like a layer of frost. The lights flickered once, briefly dimming, and for a moment the shadows on the walls seemed to stretch and twist toward me. Then, from the darkness, something whispered. It said my name, not in a voice I recognized, not even close. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It came from somewhere too close to be comfortable, yet too far to be real. The voice was low, broken, rasping as though spoken through a throat that hadn't drawn air in years. And somehow, impossibly, it said my name perfectly. Every letter, every syllable, exactly the way I would say it myself. It didn't sound like a question. It didn't call me. It repeated me, almost tasting the sound, dragging it across the dark like a memory it shouldn't have had. I remember standing up so slowly I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. The hallway light flickered again. The air smelled faintly of damp earth, like rain-soaked soil and rusted metal, something old and buried. My voice was gone. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but something deep inside told me not to. The house had gone completely silent now. Even the refrigerator's hum had stopped, like everything inside was holding its breath. I stepped toward the hallway, one slow movement at a time. The floorboards bent beneath my weight, groaning softly. And just as I reached the doorway, I heard it again. My name. But this time it came from behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly lost balance. Nothing. Just the empty room. Pale yellow light pooling weakly on the walls, the corners darker than they should have been. But I could feel it, that unseen presence shifting just out of sight, circling me. The air felt charged, heavy, electric. I could smell it now, that faint metallic scent, like wet coins and old blood. It clung to my throat, sharp and sour. When I turned back toward the hallway, I saw something. Not clearly, not like a shape or a person, more like a distortion, as though the air itself had bent inward, forming a faint outline where nothing should be. It shimmered slightly like heat haze, but darker, thicker. And within that shifting void, something seemed to move. The whisper came again, softer, closer, almost inside my ear. It said my name a third time. Only now it sounded different. Wrong. It wasn't repeating it anymore. It was using it. I could hear the faint curl of tone, the attempt at familiarity. As if whatever was in that hallway had learned something, learned how I sounded, how I breathed. Learned me. I backed away slowly, my feet searching for solid ground, my eyes fixed on the place where that distortion stood. The walls around me seemed to pulse faintly, their surfaces alive with faint tremors like breathing. Then, without warning, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed everything. For a moment, the only sound was my heartbeat, violent, uneven, echoing in my skull. Then, from the pitch black, something moved. Not footsteps, not dragging, just the sound of something wet and heavy brushing against the wall as it came closer. I could feel the vibration through the floor. It was coming toward me. I turned and ran, barely aware of where I was going. My hands scraped the walls, catching on the uneven plaster. I reached the end of the hallway and slammed the door to my room shut, locking it with trembling hands. Silence followed. I pressed my ear against the wood, listening. For a long time, there was nothing, just stillness. Then, faintly, a whisper on the other side of the door. It said my name again, and then softly, almost amused, it breathed. That sound was worse than anything else. It wasn't anger or malice. It was satisfaction, as if whatever stood there was simply waiting, patient, certain that I would have to open the door eventually. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the corner until morning, eyes fixed on the door, waiting for the handle to turn. But it never did. When the sunlight finally bled through the window, the house felt different again, quiet, almost innocent. The refrigerator hummed softly, the floorboards creaked normally. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Almost. Because when I finally worked up the courage to open the door, I found something that hadn't been there before. On the wooden floor, pressed faintly into the dust, were marks, long, narrow smears that started from the end of the hallway and stopped just in front of my door. They weren't footprints. They were too uneven, too wide, as if someone had dragged their hands across the ground, pulling themselves forward. And among those smears, barely visible in the dust, was a single print. A handprint. Too long. Too thin. Pressed so deep that the wood had splintered slightly. I told myself it wasn't real, that it was my mind, sleep-deprived, filling in blanks. But the shape stayed. I never forgot it. For weeks after that night, I felt it. The weight of eyes on me, the faint whisper that followed every time I was alone. The thing never showed itself again, not fully. But sometimes, when I stood near a mirror or past a window at night, I'd see a shape lingering just behind my reflection, still and waiting. Sometimes I'd hear my name again. Not in a dream, not from outside, but whispered softly in my own voice, from somewhere that didn't belong to me. It wasn't until years later, after I'd left that house behind, that I learned something about it. The property had been built over an older structure that burned down decades before. A small home that never made it into local records. The fire had claimed one person, a young man alone. His name was never found. But what struck me most wasn't the tragedy. It was the story an old neighbor told me, half-whispered and uncertain. He said that after the fire, people who tried living there complained about hearing voices. That something in the house would call out to them at night, softly from the dark. But it never called their names, it never knew them. Not until someone answered. And once it learned a name, it never stopped saying it. Sometimes now, when the house I live in creaks at night, I think I hear it again. A whisper from the corner, a soft breath in the dark. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I hear my name, spoken perfectly in my own voice. It's never loud. It doesn't need to be. It already knows who I am. And it's waiting for me to answer.